explain that, and how do you stay at their
Well, I just am trying to direct things versus just taking, take stuff.
Okay.
No, I don't mind, like, I know they used to.
Well, in the library, we use the real heavy duty.
Interesting. You know, they're like the, you know, like.
Yeah. I don't know.
I've seen them at my library, I go to.
She has got a bunch of DVD cases.
You know, that are like, the black, like,
Oh, okay.
Is that Perfect.
Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. I've never been to. This is the first place I can. Okay, if I can have everybody take a seat for an hour or so, less than an hour, we'll get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the actual October 2024 Legacies and Lunch. Last month I said it was October, it was really September, and I knew the minute I did it, but this is a hybrid program of the CALS Butler Center for Arkansas Studies. I'm Heather Register Zabindin, the Programs and Website Coordinator for the Bobby L. Roberts Library of Arkansas History and Art, which is just right across the street. Until the main library reopens, which is going to be sometime next year, they say, we'll be presenting Legacies and Lunch, and we have been presenting Legacies and Lunch from this space at UA Little Rock downtown. And I always like to thank Marta and Emily for giving us a great space, for being very welcoming, and a lot of fun to work with. So we'll be here until the main library reopens. So if you have not signed up for our email list, you can go to the kiosk at the back as you leave and sign up to get the Roberts Library email blasts. They come about once a week, maybe occasionally a little bit more often, like when we're getting ready for our genealogy workshop. But you can find out all the information about the programs that we're doing related to history, art, genealogy, the memory lab, those kinds of things. So sign up at the kiosk, or you can go to robertslibrary.org. At the bottom in the footer is a little subscribe button. Click that, and you'll get to the right place. We also encourage people to donate to the programs of the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies and the Encyclopedia of Arkansas. You can go to either of the websites, robertslibrary.org or encyclopediaofarkansas.net, and click on the donate button in the top right-hand corner. You can make a one-time donation. You can make a monthly recurring donation, and it's my understanding you can make some kind of like living estate donation. So we will take it and we will use your money well. So today's talk is being live streamed. Yep. Okay, good. And will be available immediately following on YouTube. So you'll be able to share it, rewatch it, whatever you'd like. At the end of the program, we'll take questions, and I'll read the ones out from Zoom. We'll take questions from the audience here. So stay tuned for that. And if everybody in person will please silence your cell phones. That's always great. So today we are joined by Rebecca Glazier. Did I pronounce that right?
Glazier.
Glazier, okay. I meant to ask you that at the beginning. But we were busy talking about other things. She's a professor in the School of Public Affairs at UA Little Rock. She surveyed over 4,000 congregants. Let me say that again, 4,000. That's 4,000 people, y'all. And nearly 500 clergy here in Little Rock to gather their opinions on community issues and engagement. So she is going to share some of that information and some of those results with us today. She also has published it in the form of a book, which you can purchase at your local bookstore or your favorite online book location. So everybody, please give a warm welcome to Rebecca.
I'm super excited to be here today and to be talking about faith and community. As Heather mentioned, I have been researching this topic for the last 12 years, so it is very near and dear to my heart. And through all this research, something that I have learned is that Little Rock is a pretty special place. I moved here many years ago, and when I did, I was asked a question that I had never heard before. Maybe those of you who've lived in the South for a while have heard this question. I was asked, do you have a church home? And has anyone in here ever asked someone else this question? Or maybe you've been asked this question yourself? It was a new question to me because, don't tell anyone, but I moved here from California. And in California, no one had ever asked me before if I went to church. And definitely no one had ever referred to church as a home. And this question really told me something new about the community that I had moved into. It told me some really important things. It told me that here in Arkansas, that faith was really central to the people where I was living. That it was not something on the peripheral, but it was something that was really at the heart of many people's lives, their families, their community, their decisions. And also, it taught me that faith can feel like home. And I think that that is something that is really beautiful, that maybe we can just sit with for a minute, that faith can feel like home. And maybe that has been your experience, and maybe it hasn't, but I think that it's really aspirational, that we can have communities, places of worship that can feel like family to us. But you may be aware that faith communities, that places of worship all across the United States are facing a number of challenges right now. And I want to talk about some of them and share some data with you. So these challenges can be a little bit daunting. One of them is the declining attendance that is seen at many places of worship. So when we look at the data, the National Congregation Study in 2007, they asked congregation leaders if they had seen a decline in their regularly participating adults. And 17% of them said that they had. This was in 2007. When they asked that same question in 2019, that number, wait for it, the tension builds.
Yeah. Oh. Okay. There we go.
And, nope.
All right.
Now it's gonna jump like 8 slides.
Yeah.
What happened in 2019? There it is! In 2019, that number was almost 40% of congregations had seen a decline in their attendance numbers. So, definite issue for places of worship. Let's see if we can see what else is happening. Here we go. So this is data on the median weekly attendance size. So how many people are in the pews? How many people are showing up to worship services? In 2007, it was about 137 people in your average worship service. When we look at the same number for 2020, it was down to 65. Now, importantly, these numbers are all collected before the pandemic hit these places of worship and dealt them an additional blow, harming their attendance numbers even more. So, declining attendance is a challenge facing congregations. In addition to lower numbers, we also see aging congregations. So, the average age of people attending places of worship is also getting higher. So, when we look at, let's say, 20-somethings, people from ages 20 to 29, back in the 80s, only about 10% of them would identify as what social scientists call religious nuns. Not those kind of nuns. Religious nuns are people who say that they don't have any religious affiliation at all. When you say, where do you attend, or what do you believe, or what's your affiliation, they'll just say, none of the above, none of those. I don't belong to any of them. And so those religious nuns was about 10% in the 1980s for 20-somethings. By the time we got to 2016, that number was up to 36%. By 2022, it was at 46%. So almost half of 20-somethings of young people are saying that they don't believe in anything, that they're religious nuns. When we look at the average age of attendant at a congregation in 2000, that age was 50. By 2020, it was up to 57. So congregations are getting older, they're not connecting with young people as much as they used to. When we look at other challenges that congregations are facing, it's an election year. I'm a political science professor. If you happen to have looked at the news lately or been on social media or tried to have a conversation with someone who may hold political views who are different than yours, you may have noticed that we're getting further and further away from each other, that our society is getting really polarized. And it's not just affecting all of us, it's also affecting the people who are leading these congregations. So in fact, 1/3 of pastors say that the current political divisions have negatively impacted their ability to lead their church. So it's really having a strong impact on them. And I want to show you this really cool map. So this is a map of geographic partisan sorting. And this is of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I wish I had one of Little Rock, but this is as close as I could get. And all of the blue dots, if you zoom in, these are all individual people who voted Democratic. And all of the red dots are all individual people who voted Republican. And you can see how all the blues and all the reds have self-sorted and clustered together. I think this is a great opportunity to think about our own lives and our own experiences and how often we are coming into contact with people who are ideologically distinct from ourselves. Is that happening in our own neighborhoods, in our own places of worship, in our own friend groups, or are we self-sorting into interactions where we only interact with people who view the world the same way that we do? As another challenge, we have people who are losing their faith. So people are not feeling as strongly tied to their faith as they have been in the past. So people are experiencing what some people call faith crises. And so, for instance, if you were to ask people if they believe in God, about 80% of people will say yes, that they believe in God. But if you were to say, are you sure? That number will drop down to about 50%. We lost it again. That number drops down to about 50% when we say, are you sure that you believe in God? Because you just have less of that confidence. And when people are going through a faith crisis, when they're not quite sure if they believe, institutional religion may not be a place where they feel comfortable grappling with that uncertainty. And so you see more people pull back and pull away from the structure of organized religion. And that's a challenge for places of worship today. So all of these things come together to mean diminishing resources for places of worship, because you have fewer people attending. The ones who are attending might be older and might be less able to contribute in the ways that they used to. And the people who are attending might be feeling a little bit of antagonism towards some of the other people they come into contact with, because maybe they're not sharing the same beliefs, and maybe they're not feeling as connected and rooted in their faith as they used to. And all of that means that people are able to contribute to their congregation in fewer ways than they used to in the past. And it adds up to a lot of challenges facing places of worship today. So that was super depressing. I'm sure you're all really glad you came out to this talk on a Wednesday afternoon. I mean, at least Heather brought you cookies, so that is the upside. But maybe you're feeling like you just want to go home and weep for the state of religion in America today. But I hope you don't leave yet, because as I mentioned, I've been researching this topic for the last 12 years, and I have some super cool findings that I'm really excited to share with you today. So I want to tell you that it matters that congregations are facing these challenges, and that there is reason for hope. So let's get there. First, I want to tell you a little bit about the Little Rock Congregation Study. So this is the research project that I direct. We have been active since 2012 when we first started. And as Heather mentioned, we've worked with a lot of congregations. We've collected all kinds of clergy surveys and clergy interviews. We have surveyed over 4,000 congregants. We've had focus groups with 180 of them. And I have to give a huge shout out to our student researchers. Over 200 of them have got to engage in community research on the ground, working on this project, and we couldn't have done it without them. And through all of this research, this multi-method approach, collecting tons of data and analyzing it over more than a decade, we have come to a social science conclusion that I am confident in and excited to share with you today. And that is, community engagement is good. Now I know this must sound really earth-shattering. It's something that is just blowing your minds right now. Or maybe it's something that you already knew deep in your soul. It's already something that you feel like resonates with you. And I want to break it down for you with data, because I think there's something really powerful when we can find a truth that we feel like resonates with our hearts and then see the data that supports it as well. So first up, how community engagement is good for individual people. And we measure this in a number of different ways through our research. And first is through life satisfaction. So we ask people about how satisfied they are with their lives on a scale from 0 to 100. And we do something statistically called predicted probabilities, where we hold everything consistent and just vary one thing. So the one thing that we vary here is how engaged people are in the community. And at the lowest level of engagement, everything else held consistent. How much money they have, how old they are, all of those things. So that's not affecting the outcome here. It's just how engaged they are in the community. But at the lowest level, they're at a 71 for life satisfaction. If all we do is change their community engagement from the lowest to the highest level, you see a 10-point increase in life satisfaction. So engaging in the community really does lead to higher happiness in your life. Another way that we see this is because we were talking to congregants and people of faith, we had a clergy advisory board. And our clergy advisory board told us, we want to see more questions about how people are doing in terms of their faith. And so we asked questions about how connected people were to God, if they were feeling closer to God. And what we found was that when people get engaged in the community, they feel closer to God. They feel connected to something greater than themselves. And they feel happier. So maybe this has been your experience as well, but this has definitely been my experience. This picture up here on the screen is of my son, who happens to be not feeling very good today and home from school and hiding out in the back today. But he, as a family, we were participating in a community service event a little while ago, and he got to help pack meals for people who were hungry. And he loved being a part of this. So we were part of this assembly line. He was helping pack oatmeal, and he got to scoop that and work with the team. And his favorite part was they had you could seal it with one of those heat sealers that would make the plastic parts seal together. He loved being in charge of that. And we packed thousands of meals for people who otherwise wouldn't get them. And that brought so much joy being part of a team and contributing and giving to our community. And maybe you've been part of something like that, a big service event that you've worked with a lot of people together. Or maybe for you, you felt that joy of service and connection to something bigger than yourself, or connecting with your neighbor through smaller things. Maybe it's just sharing some cookies that you bake with your neighbor. Maybe it's chatting with someone on your street when you're both walking your dogs together. Maybe it's taking back someone's grocery cart for them in the parking lot. Maybe it's something small like that. But as you're thinking to yourself about the ways that you connect with people in your community and the joy that you get from those kinds of service, I want you just to pause. Maybe you're sitting next to someone that you know here today, or maybe there's no one here that you know, but I want to pause for just a second and look around and make awkward eye contact, and then just share for 30 seconds. Tell a story to someone who is near you about a time when you had an experience in the community serving and you found joy in doing that. And there are people on Zoom, type your experience in there so that other people can hear it and can learn about that joy. So look around, try to find someone you don't know and share a time when you gave some service and felt some happiness.
Nice to see you. I didn't realize when I came and sat down next to you. How are things going? Yeah, it's actually, I know Rebecca through my local women's group where we do a lot of like volunteer work, and so that's how I initially met Rebecca. And I work from home now, so it does make me feel better. It does make me feel better to get out to the community and interact with people.
Once a day for 10 days.
Well, it's just, I got married recently, you know, if you work in an office, thank you. Like, if you work in an office, and, you know, people will, like, they congratulate you in person, and then, you know, my coworkers are doing their best online, but it's not the same sense, and so I do try to get out of the house, because my husband and I both work out of the house, we're like, please, let us get out of this place.
Yeah. And so I loved it because mine's extrovert society stuff. Anytime we have why I think I'm going to try just yesterday. My church was
Or even, you know, back working for Cal's or when I transitioned to our house, there's still, Cal's especially, like you're doing community engagement every single day, but I think that there is also
All right.
doing the community outside of your
Thank you for sharing those wonderful experiences.
good for you. Where'd you move from?
Ooh, we've got high fives, we've got connections being made. I love this. Awesome, thank you so much for taking the opportunity to share your joy and share your experiences with each other. I love that for you, thank you. One of the other things that we know from our research about how individuals benefit from community engagement is it's associated with better physical and mental health. And so the causal mechanism here, which is social science speak for how it works, is that usually community engagement, what it's doing is it is abetting loneliness. And loneliness is really an epidemic in America today, and it actually has health consequences that are more dangerous for people than smoking or obesity. And so what happens, so think about the exchange that you just had. All you did was spend, 1 minute talking with someone that you didn't know about a time when you gave service and hearing about them and sharing a little bit of joy. And don't you feel just a little bit happier from having that interaction? We are social creatures, and even those of us who are introverts, you brave introverts who came out to this event today, we need those opportunities for human connection. It is good for our bodies and our brains. It happens in like real measurable chemical, physical ways. It's good for us to have these connections. And when we are in a community, think about our aspirational faith community that really feels like family. When we're in a community like that and we serve each other, what that looks like is when somebody doesn't make it to worship services, we check on each other and make sure that they're okay. When somebody's sick, we bring them chicken noodle soup and make sure that they're feeling all right. When somebody is mourning the death of a loved one, we sit with them and comfort them. When somebody needs a ride to the doctor, we take them. And all of those things add up to real outcomes in terms of better physical and better mental health. And so we see that at an individual level, that individual people with community engagement have better physical and mental health, but we also see that aggregate up to the congregation level. And that's what I want to talk about next, which is how community engagement is good for congregations. So, of course, we have this attendance issue that we've been talking about. And when people are engaged in their community, they're actually much more likely to attend. So we did, again, this predicted probability statistical models and found that when someone is giving a lot of service, those are exactly the kind of people who are much more likely to attend. In fact, at the highest level of service, they are 96% likely to attend every week. So service and attendance are really, really tightly linked in these statistical models. Those are the people who are going to be showing up and going to be attending every week. Another way that we looked at this was not just asking the individual people about their attendance, but asking the clergy about whether over the last 2 years, the number of people attending their weekly services had increased, decreased, or stayed the same. And then we correlated that with the number of social and community programs offered by the congregation. So these programs could be a variety of things, everything from veteran services to food pantries to marriage counseling to adopting the local elementary school. And what we found was those congregations that were offering more social programs were more likely to say that their attendance numbers had increased over the past 2 years. And because we had a really large sample, this was over 110 congregations in the city of Little Rock, we could control for things like the size of the congregation, how much money the congregation had, how long the clergy person had been leading that congregation. So we knew that it wasn't just big, wealthy, well-connected congregations that were offering these programs and were growing. It was in fact all kinds of congregations who were engaged in the community that were able to increase their membership. Additionally, coming back to this idea of congregational culture, when you have this, so how we measured congregational warmth, that is the measurement of how you make faith feel like home. Going back to that aspiration of having a faith community that really feels like home. And we measured it through a whole series of survey questions. Things like, my place of worship feels like family, I would be willing to invite people here, I can talk to my pastor about anything. We combined all of those together into a measure of congregational warmth. And we found that in congregations where you had more community engagement, you had higher levels of warmth. You had more of that feeling of being your church community, your faith feeling like home. Additionally, in places where you had that warmth, we're just gonna flip right back over and I'm gonna click on the next thing here. You also had this additional benefit that those types of congregations had higher levels of giving, is what the next thing that's going to appear on the screen. Because people felt more connected. And so they wanted to not only give service to the congregation, but they were also willing to contribute financially to the congregation, which is something that not a lot of pastors will talk about, but it's something that's really important to making sure that your congregation is going to be running well. So congregational warmth has that connection where everybody is going to be feeling like family, and also they're going to be attending because they want to be there because that's where their family is, and also they're going to be giving. So that's really good for your congregational culture. This is the way that one of our clergy put it in an interview, that churches with high member involvement, those are places where people make friends and form community, and that is a gift to the church and to the member. So we see this benefit at both the individual level and then aggregating up to the level of the congregation as well. One of my favorite findings from our research is that younger members want to serve. So we have this problem of aging congregations, but it doesn't have to be that way, because time and time again in our data, we saw that younger members want to get involved, and especially they want to be out there engaging in the community. Right across the bat from the outset, we find that younger members are more likely to be serving right now, both inside and outside their congregations. There's a stereotype that the service is mostly coming from older retired members, but in fact, younger members are more likely to be the ones who are serving. Additionally, they express high interest in volunteer opportunities. So we asked on our surveys, what are the most important community issues to you? We asked about a variety of community issues, everything from crime to race relations to healthcare, a bunch of community issues, and we asked, are they very important, somewhat important, not at all important. And then if it was a very important issue, we said, is this an issue you want your congregation to get involved in? Because there are some issues, maybe crime, you might say it's very important, but that's not something I want my congregation to do anything about. But maybe race relations, you might say, yeah, that's very important, and I think my congregation should be leading on this issue. And so then we asked a follow-up question and we said, okay, this matters to you, you want your congregation involved in it, are you willing to volunteer on it? And across the board, we saw young people saying, more than older people in their congregations, yes, I want to get involved to do something. So, and when we talk to them in interviews, we see this time and again that they want more than just worship services. They want to live out their faith. They want to do something about it. They want to volunteer. They want community engagement. So in order to counter this aging population in places of worship, they need to do more to engage young people in the community and in living out their faith. When we're talking about spiritual health, this goes to the questions that our clergy really wanted us to address. So we asked a question about feeling a deep sense of spiritual peace and well-being, and we found that when people are engaged in the community, this is what they feel. And this is what clergy leaders want for their congregations, right? They want congregations where people feel this connection to something bigger than themselves and spiritual peace and well-being. And this quote from a clergy leader, I think, exemplifies this really well, who said, "We have better church when our community projects are going on. I believe it is a spiritual law." So the congregations do better when they are engaged in the community. The culture of the congregation, the spirit that is present in their congregation is better. So maybe you're thinking, okay, that all sounds great, but how are congregations supposed to do this? They have limited resources. How can they lead worship services, take care of their members, keep the lights on, and still be engaged out in the community? That feels like a lot to put on them. We know that the people in this room are pretty engaged. They show up on a Wednesday to come to a community lecture. You shared some of your service with people here in the room. Have any of you ever contributed service to your place of worship, just by show of hands? Has anybody ever done that?
Like ever in your life?
Ever in your life, given service at your place of worship? Like, I don't know, set up chairs for the fish fry, anything like that? Hid Easter eggs, yeah? Okay, and has anybody ever volunteered like out in the community, like helped Habitat for Humanity, donated blood, anything like that? Okay, there's a lot of overlap in those hands. A lot of the people who are helping their places of worship are also helping in the community, which is exactly what we found in our data, that there is no trade-off between serving your congregation and serving your community. That it's not a zero-sum game, that if you go out and help Habitat for Humanity, no one is going to come and hide eggs for your Easter egg hunt. In fact, we find that the more you go out and serve the community, the more that creates a culture of service in your congregation, and people come back and spend more time serving your congregation. It creates a positive feedback loop. And so there is no trade-off. You don't have to worry about a zero-sum game here. You can create a positive feedback loop of a culture of service at your congregation. Okay, the final benefit I want to talk about is how community engagement is good for society. So this is leveling up from individuals to congregations to now democracy and society as a whole. And what we see here is first, just in basic social service provision. Congregations do so much out in the community to help people in need. So when we surveyed our congregations, we found an average of 3.8 social services were being provided by each congregation. So these are things, the most common one was marriage and family counseling. We also saw a lot of rent and utility assistance because there's a lot of poverty in our city. Also a lot of food pantries as well. So these are all things that, these are the top 3 categories. There's a lot of service going out just to help people in need from our congregations. But more than that, we have something that's a little less tangible, but that's really important to political scientists, and that's social capital and political efficacy. So social capital is like the connections between people that makes us trust one another, and political efficacy is the sense that our voice matters and that we can make a difference in the world. And these things are a little more ephemeral, but they're really important to making sure that our society runs well and that democracy doesn't collapse. So when we feel like our voice matters, we're more likely to get out there, to vote, to attend community meetings, to talk to our neighbors. And when we are engaged in the community, these types of things, our social capital and our political efficacy, go up. So at a time like right now, when there might be a lot of people who are feeling disillusioned and like they don't matter, community engagement can offset those feelings and can help bolster connections between people and the feeling like they can make a difference. And that's really important and good for democracy. And finally, I want to talk about ideological diversity. And this can be really hard to achieve within a congregation. But what we found is that those congregations who can create a space where people from different places on the ideological spectrum can be together, that can create really strong benefits for that place of worship. So the key is to create a space where you have diversity but not division. Because there are places of worship where people are together from different parties and are not happy about it, right? And are at each other's throats. And that's not a good place to worship. But if you have people from different ideological places worshiping together in a healthy way, that can be really beneficial. In fact, we see them able to connect with each other and see each other as real human beings by serving together. Because if you're standing next to someone in a food pantry for a couple hours and helping serve others, you stop seeing that person as someone that you can caricature as the other side and start seeing them as a real human who also is trying to do good in the world. And ideologically diverse congregations actually have higher levels of warmth in our data because they're getting to know each other across those ideological lines. And you have higher political efficacy, so more of that belief that you can make a difference. So these congregations are rare, but we need more of them. As one leader of an ideologically diverse congregation in Little Rock said, "There's a place for people at our church who vote blue and red, and I'd be careful about alienating either. There are too few places in our society where they mingle as it is." I would agree. So with all of these challenges that are facing places of worship, I hope we can see that all of them can be countered by community engagement. Whether it's declining attendance, aging congregations, or the polarization that exists right now, when people get engaged in the community, they are more likely to attend. We can bring young people in. We can eliminate those barriers that are created by the divisions that we have right now, and we can help people feel closer to God. Now, you might be thinking, I don't care, no matter how, if it's not important to you whether people feel closer to God, or you don't care if their congregations are aging or getting smaller or losing their resources, community engagement by places of worship is still good for democracy and for society as a whole because of how they provide services to our society and help lift people up, and because of how it's helping break down divisions and increase political efficacy. Those are public goods that benefit everyone, even if you're not a person of faith. So, where do we go from here? There's a book with more information if you want to read it and check it out. There's the discussion guide. You might have missed it because it was next to some cookies in the back, which is certainly the priority. I would encourage you to take a discussion guide with you. You can share it with your congregations. Those might be places where you can start conversations about where to go from here, about how to engage your congregation in heading out into the community. Because congregations are at very different places in terms of their priorities, in terms of their resources. And so making partnerships with other congregations, making partnerships with nonprofits, there are lots of nonprofits in our city who are doing great work, and connecting your congregation to one of them might be a great way and an easy lift to begin with community engagement. But having those conversations with other members, or thinking about if you are part of a nonprofit or part of a city or part of an organization, how to reach out to a congregation, because they might have a bunch of people who want to get involved, who have as part of their faith ethos to help and serve others. So you can tap into those resources, and that is good for our city, for our community, and for democracy as a whole. So thank you so much for letting me share this message, and I'm happy to take questions. Thanks.
There's the green light. Thank you so much. That was fabulous. I'm gonna start with the first question.
Yeah.
In the congregants that you talked to, the post-pandemic ones that saw almost the pandemic as a way to get out of some of their obligations to their congregation, did you get a sense for that? Speaking as someone who got out of some obligations to a congregation because of the pandemic. Sorry.
No.
Sorry, start with the negative question.
Interesting. Asking for a friend, huh?
Yes, asking for a friend.
I think, the pandemic that's an interesting little subset of time. I think that a lot of people were ready to just take a beat, right?
Mhm.
Like to take a breather and pause on a lot of we were doing a lot, and it was nice to pause and stop running around and doing so much for a minute. And so I think a lot of people felt that. I think that in terms of the congregations that we researched, in terms of other research on this, it really bifurcated in terms of how congregations responded. So ones that were already online and that already had like good infrastructures for live streaming their services and for taking online donations and things like that, those congregations did pretty good, and some of them even grew during the pandemic. The smaller congregations, the ones who weren't ready to continue to like engage their members, some of them frankly didn't survive. And so some of their members, there were some who were like, I'm ready just for a break and didn't engage with religion at all. And there were some who were like, no, I still want religion and I'm not able to get it in my small congregation because they don't have their act together with live streaming or with helping me like feel connected. So I'm gonna go over to one of these bigger congregations, and then they just stayed at one of those bigger congregations. And so that's why those ones kind of fell apart. And I think some people have stayed with big congregations, some people have stayed away from religion entirely, and some people have come back to places that were able to hold on, or just have come back to new places after the pandemic. But I think a lot of people were ready to take a break, and some people are ready to come back, and some people have decided not to come back to religion at all. And I think we see that in the declining attendance numbers that are even worse post-pandemic than the ones from before. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, questions. I'm gonna go to Helen first.
I'm wondering, does online church, has that taken up some of the diminishment of in-person church? People that attend online. I know a lot of my friends just go online, they haven't been in their church in years now.
Yeah, so the declining attendance that I showed was all pre-pandemic.
Right.
There are some places that are trying to measure post-pandemic, and we do see an uptick in numbers when you account for who is attending online, because there are congregations that are keeping track of that, right? You can see how many people are attending via Zoom, how many people are logging in, and so you do see from the pandemic some numbers coming up, but even those numbers are not back to pre-pandemic levels. So you still see the decline that we had before the pandemic. So those 2020 numbers that were down like to the average attendance at 65, the median attendance at 65, it's still lower than that now.
So the pandemic exacerbated those numbers.
Yep, you're exactly right. The pandemic exacerbated the trend that was already declining.
I'm gonna go here, and then Marta, and then Nate.
First of all, I want to thank you for this important work. I think it brings a lot of value across Central Arkansas and even greater. And my question, since you started with being from California and here, do you think the results are regionally slanted, I don't know if slanted is the right word, but if there's some regional results that would be replicated differently in another Midwest or East or West Coast.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So this study really was a deep dive into Little Rock because we only looked within the city limits of Little Rock, and we went, I think, really both deep and wide in Little Rock. So we looked at all kinds of different congregations. We have Jewish and Muslim and Black Protestant and Catholic and mainline Protestant and evangelical and Mormon and all kinds within our city, small and large and rural and urban. And we looked at in-depth case studies and qualitative and quantitative data so we could really understand what was happening here. And I think that there are some things that are unique to Little Rock, right? We're in the South, the particular racial history that we have here in the city. I think those things are unique, but I do think that there are broader patterns of the benefits of community engagement that I think are reinforced by literature from across the United States. I think that those benefits would hold for congregations anywhere, I think, in the world, because I think that that's about human nature and not inherent to what's happening here in Little Rock.
So, Rebecca, I have a question about how we define community engagement and volunteering. If it's an opportunity to engage in an action that might be harmful to the society, right? So I'm thinking, what about the groups, since we have our friends from Kyle's in the room, that organize and see book banning activities as a community engagement, right? What if family counseling that you mentioned is telling the queer youth not to be queer, right? Or an example I know from my own life, which is community engagement in the congregation means to get together and go to stand in front of Planned Parenthood and harass people who enter and exit, right? Would you comment on how that showed in your study? And I know this is a very subjective, right? What we see as harmful to the society or not. Politics is part of it, but I was wondering whether you could comment on that.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a really valuable question. We define community engagement a couple of different ways in our study. So one is just basically we ask them how many hours of service did you give to your congregation and how many hours of service did you give outside your congregation. And so that is them defining hours of service. So if they considered protesting in front of a Planned Parenthood clinic service, then they could have counted that as an hour of service. I don't think many people would have considered that an hour of service, but maybe some people would. So that is one way that we measured service. But we also measured community engagement in a different way, and that was through like a battery of questions that is pretty broad, which is things like I talk about community problems with my family and friends, or like even things that are just about belief, like I believe that government and politics is too difficult for me to understand, and then we reverse code that, so people who say like, yeah, I can understand what's going on here. So people who are talking about issues with their family, who believe that they can understand things, who say like, I attend meetings to try to understand what's happening in my community, things like that. So those are pretty broad categories about like just engaging, talking about, thinking about, being part of your community. So we didn't ask specifically like, we did have other questions about politics, like have you signed petitions, have you attended protests and things like that that were explicitly political. But the community questions were a little bit more broad. So we didn't put any kind of judgment on to when the congregations were reporting to us what their community activities were. So we let the congregation leaders define that. So when they said marriage and family counseling, they could have been counseling a family, right, to send their queer child to conversion therapy. We don't know what the content of that counseling was. So it's possible that that's what that could have looked like. And this data doesn't have the ability to pull that out. So the question you're saying is, if they're doing that, do we really want to consider that a positive thing?
I'm thinking, so how would that shape your findings, right? What you mentioned about, like, the health of democracy, right? The health of choice, of a community engagement, right? Would that have some impact on those conclusions?
I think it's more of a philosophical question than one that would shape these data, because there are very few congregations that are engaging in that type of work. So the congregations that we talked to are doing work like holding food pantries, hosting AA meetings, helping pay the rent of people who can't afford to pay their rent. Very few congregations are, there's a couple congregations I can think about that, like, during the time we were studying them, like the leader would go to like the Little Rock School District rallies. But very few are doing overtly political things in either direction. Most of the time, although religion is often politicized, most of the time congregations in their daily business are not thinking about politics. They're thinking about who's my member who is in the hospital that needs to be visited, who's somebody that I need to pray over who's going through a hard time, like who do I need to counsel with, like they're not thinking about politics 98% of the time. So I think it's too small of an end to affect the data across thousands.
I guess this relates to what Mark is talking about.
Yeah.
And I ask this as every Sunday, most of my life, Methodist. But I think one of the places that I'm curious about is that your idea that this is not a zero-sum thing.
Yeah.
I think in some ways it may be for those nuns, the escalating number of people who say, I don't want to have anything to do with any church, but I feel some sense to do community engagement things. And I think part of it is a lot of young people look at the activities that Marta has described, or the rhetoric that gets attached to a lot of these political movements. Most of the people who write me and complain about the books in my library will invoke some sort of religious purpose, motivation. You go to Saline County, where they're trying to run the librarian off 6-8 months ago, and there are people telling the county government, Jesus has sent me here, in essence, to command that you stop having books about systemic racism or books about queer life or anything that we find to be at odds with our understanding of this canon. And I think when people who see that in the community are trying to decide whether they want to be a part of any church, they shrink from it. And I think they say, well, I agree, community engagement's good. It's good for the community, it's good for my mental health, it's good for all the reasons you've identified. But I don't want to do it in the cloak of anything that is out in the community, dividing people and marginalizing people, and some of them just hating people in the name of Jesus or in the name of their creeds. I think that is what drives so many people into thinking you can't do both. You either engage in the community in the way that you want to be, independently of this sort of politicized religion that justifies a lot of its community engagement by its sanctioning hate in the name of some sort of religious creed. And I think that is what is causing so many young people to say, I don't need to do that.
Yeah, and I think that there is really good data. The Pew Research Center has some really good data on why people leave church, and politicization is a strong reason why. One of the key arguments in the book is that if you want to do community engagement, you need to take politics out of it. And a lot of that comes down to the leader and the way that leaders can frame community engagement, because if you want to get people in your congregation and young people excited and engaged in the community, it can't be a partisan divisive issue, especially if you're trying to, pull together a congregation that may have people from different places on the ideological spectrum in there. And so maybe you need to pick a really easy issue like reading to kids or something that is not gonna feel politically divisive. But maybe it might be more politically divisive, like, I don't know, like going to prisons and visiting people there. But it comes down to the leader making sure that that's framed as an issue of faith and not an issue of politics. So that people see it through that faith lens and not a political lens. Because when it is politicized, that is what drives people away. You're right.
Well, I think it's when it's politicized in such a harsh and negative and divisive way. I mean, yesterday was Jimmy Carter's 100th birthday, and I saw some quote last night that was a tribute to Carter. I assume it's not one of those hallmark colored apocryphal things that we credit Lincoln for saying he never said. But he said, if you say this is going to be a Christian nation, but you don't want to spend government funds to take care of poor people, then you're missing it. It can't be. And I think that is political. That is religious. And I don't think that drives young people away from organized religion. But I think if you're protesting, if you're harassing people on the steps of Planned Parenthood or whatever other abortion providing clinic there is that may still exist, you're sending a message that objectively seems at odds with what young people think is inherent in most religious creeds about your neighbor, love your neighbor, take care of people, and be kind to people, and not spewing this sort of hatefulness. So I don't think you can take politics out of it if you are a Jimmy Carter type Baptist, but I think it's the way you do the politics that says, only my view of those texts is one that will get you to the place where you're supposed to be. I think that's what puts people off.
We can keep talking, but I think Heather wants to steal that mic back.
He took the words right out of my mouth. So any other questions from,
I'd like to just,
hang on.
I'm really loud, Heather.
I know you're really loud.
Just to build a little bit on what Nate was saying, it's not just divisive politics, I think, that turn people away from congregations. I think it's politics in general, or at least that's what I've seen. I come from a very, very liberal congregation, but we're in Arkansas, and so there are people who don't necessarily see the politics in that way, in the way of when we put something out there as helping in the community, they don't see it the same way necessarily that the congregation does, and we're losing people for that reason just as much as for the divisive politics. So I think it's people don't want that mixed together.
Any other questions?
One more right
Oh, okay.
As a young person, I think in my congregation, a lot of people my age feel unheard pretty frequently by church leaders because I oftentimes get a sense of, well, you're in your 20s, what do you know? What are you talking about? Like, we're older, we know what's going on in our community, so how do you recommend people my age, obviously having conversations, but almost, I guess, convince church leaders that the issues and the things that we value are important and, congregation-wide, people should get involved in.
Oh, I love that question, and I think that lay leaders and congregations can have so much power. I think you've got to take advantage of the fact that congregation leaders are overwhelmed and super busy. So I would come with a plan, like say, this is an organization that I think we should get engaged with. Here are 3 people in the congregation who are on board with this. I'd like to form a committee and talk about how we can get engaged and do more volunteer work with this organization. And I can almost guarantee you they'll say, great, do that. Because it'll take it off their plate and you'll have people who are already invested in it. And then they'll say, run with it and let's get you involved and engaged. Because they're super busy and they want people to help.
Yeah, as someone who's married to a church staff member, I can say, yes, they are busy. If you're like, I have an idea and I'm gonna do it, they'll be like, awesome, go for it.
And starting out a congregation with young clergy they might listen to you a little bit more. But I mean, as someone who used to be part of the 20%, so there's the 20-80 rule, right? 20% of the people do all of the work and 80% just come to church. As someone who was the 20%, I would be glad to, like, I have a list of things that I did pre-pandemic that, you know, if you were my faith leader, you could take that on. So any other questions, comments? Well, thanks, y'all. Thanks, Rebecca.
And I did put one more slide up here, which is a QR code for the book. And
where can you get the book?
Yes.
the
Yes.
publisher gave me a code too that you can get
perfect.
30% off. So if you want the book, here it is.
And I meant to mention that they can buy it directly from the publisher. It's Temple, right?
Yeah, Temple University.
Yeah, Temple University Press. Okay, so before we leave, before we adjourn, have our benediction. Oh, my husband would really love that joke. So a couple of announcements. This Saturday, and in front of you, there's several spread around, is our genealogy workshop at the Ron Robinson Theater, which is just on the other kind of side of Robert's Library. This year, the speaker is Bess Ida White, and she's going to talk about saving family treasures and how to make a family cookbook, which if you are not part of a family with a family cookbook, you are missing out. You have until the end of today to register and get a free box lunch. So I'm all about the free food, so please register, tell other people about this event. This is one of the big things that we do as part of the Roberts Library, so please come and enjoy Saturday with us. I think it's going to be fun. And then a week from Friday, so October 11th, is Second Friday Art Night. It happens every month on the second Friday. So it's at the Rocket Lab now, which is also across the parking lot. And in addition to our regular art and mingling and sipping of wine, we are also going to have, in conjunction with the UA Little Rock Downtown and the
School of
Literary and Performing Arts, Jazz in the Alley at the Ron Robb Alley. And that's the jazz part's going to start at 5:30. The whole thing starts at 5. So come and hang out with us on October 11th from 5 to 5:30 is the whole thing. Next month, we're going to have Dr. Jess Porter and the folks from the UA Little Rock Center for Arkansas History and Culture to talk about some of their mapping projects. So that should be interesting. That's Wednesday, November 6th at noon, right here in downtown Little Rock. If you come in person, you get a free cookie. If you are virtual, you do not get a free cookie. So thank you again for joining us. Have a great day, everybody. It's beautiful outside.